dream was clearer than a memory. I placed my heir upon the Iron Throne, and all the dragons roared as one.
A woman would not inherit the Iron Throne.
The king chose Rhaenyra.
And our line is vulnerable, too easily ended.
You heard it up top. We are once again vying for that Iron Throne. That's right. It's a power struggle here on this podcast as we go to war and talk the new Game of the Thrones spin-off, House of the Dragon, here on Normies Like Us. Your hosts, was one of the names I heard Crab Meat something? I'm
Crab
whatever
Feeder.
That guy. Crab Feeder. I'm Colin Feeder.
Yeah. I guess I'll be Mike Serious.
Yeah, that's all I got to do for a Targaryen.
first.
Yeah. My hair's not blonde. I'm more of a Dornish kind of guy.
He's Dornish.
Mm.
This is Jake Carey's Targaryen.
There we go. Yeah, I'll just stick with being from
Had to
Dorne.
add some extra vowels and some Y's and S's.
Throw some Y's in there. Yeah. Game of Thrones. Technically, I was born in 1988, which, according to Chinese zodiac, is the year of the dragon. Colin, are you a dragon too?
Nope. I'm 1989. I'm a snake.
Hey, Jacob, are you a snake?
I'm the dumb year of the horse, 90.
Oh, okay. Dang.
Yeah, I don't get a cool.
I thought you were a
That is
Slytherin
the
too.
worst.
You're just the horse.
You would be a snake.
Yeah, horses don't get treated too
wish.
well in Game of Thrones traditionally. But
Well, House of the
Sometimes
actual
they're-
dragon, Mike.
Yeah, House of the Dragon.
Horse. I'm interested in watching that show too.
yeah,
Sure.
not
I guess
to.
that would be the Dothraki, the horse lords, right?
Oh yeah. So
That's
who's
right.
this? And then you're Dorne. You're the snake guy, the Viper.
Okay.
Okay, we did it.
All making
Normies,
sense.
we are talking, of course, Game of Thrones. We have episodes of Game of Thrones. We have watches where we're going through them. We talk about our histories, how we kind of came in. We'll do a quick with that and kind of sum up where we're at with Game of Thrones, right?
Mhm.
Jacob, a fan of Game of Thrones. How you feeling about the Thrones these days?
I was very excited to watch for this show to come out. Ever since, they announced it, the casting, everything, I've been following along, ready for it. And, I've been missing Game of Thrones in my life for the last couple of years, so I'm excited to have it back.
Yeah, and
How about you guys?
you're kind of a book reader as well, right? Like to recap viewers who maybe didn't listen to our earlier Game of Thrones. You're a book reader. You're a show watcher, right?
That's right. Yeah, I've read the books. I've read even the extended lore. So
Compendiums and all that. Yeah,
One
yeah.
time we played
whatever you
that
wanna call it.
tabletop game with you, the Game of Thrones one. That was fun.
That's right. I have a tabletop game. I'm pretty into just the world of Game of Thrones, so I'm very excited to re-enter that world.
Nice. That's very cool. See, if listeners recall, I was the last one on the Thrones bandwagon. So I'm the other end of the
Little late.
spectrum. Yeah, where you guys did a whole episode on season 7 or something, and I had not seen a single episode.
Oh.
And then when season 8 was coming, I just kind of binged everything start to finish. And we know how that show ended, but
Binge it all for the last season just to get let down in the end.
Yep. I'm a Lost watcher, so I know that feeling. But I do like Game of Thrones when it's good. When it's strong, it's really strong. I like fantasy a lot, and so I was cautiously optimistic going into this. But I've never read a book or anything. I'm more of just the show guy and a fantasy guy in
Never
general.
read a book in your
Not
life.
any book. Yeah. Colin, how about you though?
You're one of these characters on the show who can't read. You're like a slave, Mike.
What do I look like? A maester, dude? I can't read.
I look like one of the eunuchs. So I want to see one of those characters start off.
They could probably read.
My dad liked George R. R. Martin. He did not read this series. I think I talked about this in one of those inaugural episodes. Go back. He was into his vampire short stories and books. So we were like a Fever Dreams household, very dumbly. So
Oh, wow.
give me that movie adaptation. I like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is really cool. I'm excited to talk more Game of Thrones today. But the main point, I guess I would like to point out to our listeners is none of us are claiming to be one of these Reddit people who, after the finale, were like, we're called the unkneeling or the unkneeled or something like. We will never, journey to Westeros again. It has been, permanently ruined, right?
Yeah.
No.
We made our journey back, and so did
The
apparently
free folk.
Yeah.
Free folk, yeah.
At least
Well, I
9.9
look
million
at
other
that,
people did too.
Reddit sometimes they have some good points on there, but I don't for me, it's about the journey, not the destination. So even if the destination isn't always the best, I can forgive it. And I really still appreciate, the first 4 seasons I think are great, and even the first 6 seasons are pretty good, like 5 and 6. So
Yeah.
I still stand by it as a worthwhile show to watch, even if the ending lets you down.
Yeah, I find it hard to recommend if someone's never seen any of it. But like, if you kind of were there, like I think anybody who was there while it was, even though I binged the ending, but it's like if you have already seen it, you really appreciate it. But I find it hard to recommend. But I do think there's value in the first 4 seasons if you're willing to just not have a satisfying conclusion. But the first 4 to 6 are super strong. I agree with you there.
And I feel the same way about Lost too. Like I would recommend the first couple seasons of Lost are really good too, just by themselves, I think. But
Not Penny's
each their
boat.
own,
Yeah, I hear you.
I'll say when I was at Comic-Con recently, in between the walk and stuff, super tired, you're just, like I've said, you're in a mall where you just kind of can't stop moving, right?
Yep.
For just hours. Snuck out for lunch. My brother came too, got to walk away from the booth he was working, ran up to our hotel, which happened to be sort of attached to the convention center. Threw on the TV. It had HBO on. I'm sure in preparation, they've been marathoning Game of Thrones for the release of this new spinoff.
Oh, cool.
It was the finale, and it started at the duel between the Hound and whatever you would call the monster.
the zombie mountain.
Yeah.
Mount Vader.
Mount Vader.
Yeah.
And I got to
the
say,
fan service.
tired, eating lunch, you just watching this fucking epic duel. The whole fucking finale kind of worked for me. So having seen it again recently, I'm kind of not even worried about it. I just liked seeing all the actors that became stars because of the show,
Yeah.
Yeah, and regardless of writing, I mean, the production value holds up throughout all of those seasons, like the sets and the costuming and props and all that. Like the world of Westeros is so well realized that even if the writing's subpar, you could just kind of get lost in the pageantry of it, and I do appreciate that.
I would even say the production value gets better as the writing quality gets worse, which is the somewhat ironic thing about it. Because the first season had
There's
the
a
worst,
balance.
the lowest budget, so it had the
That's
cheapest
rough.
sets and costumes. But so that's kind of funny.
Yeah. But overall, I think looked forward to this more or less, and that's where we're at. Yeah, in House of the Dragon. Colin, I'm looking at these notes here, and I see that you have a question for us. And I want to see if you can answer it first. Name a prequel series that works as a spin-off that's a prequel.
I put what I think the answer is there. I guess we can talk about that at the end. And I'll open it up to not even series, I guess, everything. We talked about it. The fucking episode 1. Does episode 1 work and stuff? You could say Attack of the Clones is a prequel series before some other stuff.
Or does that whole series work?
The prequel series to the originals.
I don't know. I don't think
Let's
it works.
leave it.
I don't know if there are good ones.
And answer it at the end. How's that?
Okay. I was going to say, a lot of people are already saying that Better Call Saul was better than Breaking Bad. So I guess the question is, can this show be better than Game of Thrones?
And
I guess we'll find out.
Dive into that and see if there's any other prequels that we think are at least worth having at the end of the show. How's that? All right. Well, let's burn on through into the main review of the first episode of House of the Dragon. Dracarys.
We're back. We're entering the House of the Dragon. Here on Normies Like Us, again, talking about the new HBO original spin-off of the George R. R. Martin Game of Thrones universe. Now, we're here in this majestic little castle hall, right? Throne room. And, what's this, Jacob? A little scroll has been brought up to me. I'm going to unfurl it. And it says, you're gonna run through the history of this for us.
Yes.
Where are we? When are we? Who are the main players?
The main normie question. When are we?
I can make it all very...
And we have some familiar settings from the other show. But so put us
I'll
in the
sum
zone.
it all up for you.
Please.
So basically, if you remember, in the original show, when we first start, the King Baratheon is in charge, right? Having overthrown the Targaryens, 30 years before or whatever. So obviously before that, the Targaryens were in control, and they were in control for like 300 years as the royal family. So basically, this show takes place, I think, like 179 years before the death of the Mad King, which was Daenerys' father, who was killed by Robert Baratheon. in the rebellion. Does that all make sense to you guys?
Yep, that all tracks
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Dany's in exile at this point because her family
That's
lost
right. So she
power.
was a
Baratheon's
baby.
yeah. So
Yeah.
Targaryens are
And,
rare by the time we watch the show. This is
Yes,
not so rare.
she's the last one.
Mhm.
So basically 300 years before that, Aegon the Conqueror is the first Targaryen to cross over the narrow sea from
Oh,
old
wow.
Valyria into Westeros with his dragons and conquer all of Westeros,
Mhm.
except for the North and Dorne, which eventually get conquered as well. But that's a whole other thing. But so basically, if you think about it, there's been 300 years of Targaryen reign. This is about in the middle of it. It's like halfway between Aegon the Conqueror and the current day of Game of Thrones.
Right.
So keeping that in mind, we have our main players. We have what is his name? King Viserys Targaryen. This is the other confusing thing because all Targaryen names are very similar, right? And they even reuse names sometimes.
Elden Ring is very much confusing like that too because George R. R.
Yeah.
Martin's naming conventions. Yeah, like
Well, it's based on. I mean, the Targaryens. It's like real royal houses where they'll reuse names. Like in England, they have Elizabeth and Victoria. And
8
stuff.
Henrys, all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Danny's
this,
older
it's like
brother is
Jaehaerys
also a Viserys.
Yeah,
correct?
he's Viserys the second or third, I believe. So
That's
they reuse
right.
names at times. Aegon is reused a lot because he was Aegon the Conqueror.
Mhm.
But anyways, so we have King Viserys. He came into reign after his father, Jaehaerys, was the old king. He had a long and peaceful reign. Now Viserys is king for the last 9 years. And it's a question of, his heirs. So we have his daughter, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen,
Mhm.
right? We
Sure.
have his brother, Daemon Targaryen, Prince Daemon Targaryen. That's
I like
Matt Smith, of
Marlon
course.
Targaryen more, but that's just me.
Hey, his
Yeah.
work on Scary Movie, Mike, it's great.
Yeah. But yeah, we have Daemon.
Sure. Wayans brothers. Daemon Targaryen, played by Matt Smith. We have the daughter, Princess Rhaenyra. Now, here's something I want to clear up because I was a little confused by this.
Mhm.
So, when they were, announcing the cast and everything, they said, "Oh, this actress Emma Darcy is going to play Princess Rhaenyra," right?
Yeah.
Well, in this episode, the actress playing Princess Rhaenyra is not Emma Darcy. It's actually an actress named Millie Alcock, who is basically there's going to be a time
That's
jump
what
in
I'm
this show.
anticipating. We're dealing with kind
So
of the
I was very
younger.
confused. I was looking this all
Another
up there. I was
one?
like, what's going on? So yes, there's a time jump in the plot of the show, and Princess Rhaenyra and Alicent Hightower, her friend, who is the daughter of
the Hand of the King, right?
yes, the lizard.
Yes.
Known as the
We'll talk
lizard
about
from
it.
Amazing Spider-Man.
Nice.
So those
He's
two
a
characters
baka.
are going to be played by different actresses after the time jump. So Emma Darcy will not be playing her until the time jump. Right now, it's Millie Alcock, and that is the Princess Rhaenyra, the daughter of the king.
I don't
Got
know
it.
any of these actors, so that's very interesting, and I do appreciate you clearing that up because they do look different from the people I saw in the trailer.
Yes, I was very confused by that, so I'm glad I cleared it up for myself as well. King Viserys obviously is played by Paddy Considine, who is an actor that has mainly done like a lot of indie movies and like artsy type of movies.
He's
and
done
stuff, so
like
it's an
Hot
interesting
Fuzz and
choice.
stuff, right?
Yeah, he was in
So,
Hot Fuzz.
A character actor I once remarked to my father, no one has ever said Paddy Considine is their favorite actor. He's just this guy who is a great
Probably not.
stand-in, kind of Sean Bean-esque, character guy,
Yeah,
right?
he brings a little gravitas to the role. He's also a writer-director. He made this movie called Tyrannosaur, which is a really good kind of indie movie with.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, with
No, me neither.
Olivia Williams. So check that out.
Yeah.
But anyways, so he's the kind of the king. He's kind of a not the strongest willed character, you might say. He's kind
He's
of
a cuck, you would say? Those are
He's
your
a bit of a
exact
cuck.
words? He's a bit
Yeah,
of a
but he
cuck?
really wants a male heir, obviously, because this is dealing a lot with the tradition of royal families naming heirs and usually it being a male. That
The
kind of thing.
patriarchy,
The
yeah, all that.
patriarchy,
And
yes.
part of the backstory too, Colin, is this we're going to bring up is how like he was chosen as opposed to the heir that would have been the first queen, right? So like they've
Yes.
already like skipped over a lady who was
One
next
voted
in
him
line.
in.
So
Yeah.
after the old King Jaehaerys, which he had a very long reign, so he basically all his heirs died before he did. So there was kind of a crisis in the royalty where they're like, who are we going to name? It was between Viserys and his aunt, which is the old lady that's married to
Her name's like Rhaenyra.
Lord Corlys Valerian. What's
Lord Corlys Valerian.
Valerian.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were
the prince
struggling
or
for that name?
the bringer
Jacob,
of the
that
tides.
rolls-
Yeah.
That's the guy with the
Rolls
white
right off my
dreads,
tongue.
right? In
Yeah,
the show.
Bringer
Yeah.
of the tides, of course.
She's married to him. Yep.
So she was the queen that never was, or whatever they call her.
hmm
Something
Yes.
like that. They all have titles.
That
You could
night.
lose your tongue for that. Careful.
Now, here's what I wanted to know. Here's what I was
Yes.
going to ask now, Jacob. Now that we're into the TV show territory,
This is the
you are
plot we're setting
reciting
up.
to
Mhm.
us the plot of this pilot.
Trying
And
to, yeah.
spoilers for all of Game of Thrones listeners. Not even just this, but that book behind you, is this based on something?
Yes.
Is
So
this
if
the
you're
plot
listening,
of that?
well, if you're listening, I have the World of Ice and Fire here. It's a giant kind of compendium of background information that George R.R. Martin wrote. He also wrote something called Fire and Blood, which is another kind of lore book that basically deals extensively with the plot of this show, which is the Dance of the Dragons, which was like the biggest conflict before Game of Thrones happened.
hmm
So in a lot of ways, it is like the Star Wars prequels, where it's setting up like, or it's like the Harry Potter thing, right? With Grindelwald being like the biggest thing to ever come out before Voldemort.
Mhm.
This is like this started the biggest war before the big war that happened.
But do you think we're going to get straight translated from text? Like we're going to see word to screen?
Pretty much, yeah.
I would-
there's not dialogue. That's the difference. Is like it's not a novel in the traditional sense. It's more just like a history telling.
It's a
It's like
dirty
the-
Can
limerick.
expand on it a bunch.
It's like the other RR, writer, J.R. Tolkien. He would have these like compendiums. It's like, here's a bunch of dates and successors and events vaguely, but it's not like
Right.
scenes. But
But
I
the
think
thing is, the writers of the show are working very closely with George R. R. Martin, at least at this point. Which
Well,
is
after the
was
Benioff
kind
and
of
Weiss
became a
debacle,
problem.
yeah, they're going
That
to
became
stick
a
to
problem
it.
on the original show, where he was involved early on, and the more the show went on, they kind of were like shut him out of the process. Now he's very involved, and he's giving, I'm sure, a lot of expanded information to them as well.
A lot of people were quick to point out when the series did fall off that it was because Benioff and Weiss ran out of source material, and then that's when things got weaker. So it would behoove
Right.
HBO to like stick as closely as possible. But that led me into an issue as someone who hasn't read this stuff. You just kind of broke down the relationships between the key players, because that's what this episode is doing. It's setting up who's next in line for succession, who wants power, right? And then I'm like, all right, so who is this person? Is she the daughter? Like, who's this best friend
Right.
character? And then you look it up, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but you look it up and you're like, oh, this is this character, and she does X thing or becomes X
Right.
person's
Oh,
wife.
really,
And then you're
Mike?
like,
Even if you look
well,
at,
what
like,
the
family
fuck?
trees-
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
even if you look at like
Yeah.
family trees, it'll spoil certain things that are already being foreshadowed in the show.
And it's a little
I'll try not to
frustrating.
go- I'll
Yeah.
try not to go into that too much. But essentially, yeah, you have King Viserys. He wants a male heir very badly, right? His
Yep.
wife has given birth to one daughter, that's Princess Rhaenyra,
Mhm.
and then has had a lot of like stillbirths and accidents where it didn't go right in pregnancy, which
Miscarriages and
happened a
stuff,
lot in kind of medieval times. Obviously, medicine wasn't sophisticated, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So he's like desperate for a male heir. Right now, his brother Daemon, Matt Smith, is the heir presumptive in case there is no male heir, right?
Mhm.
And that's generally
Alright.
how it would. Yeah. Let's
So
talk about
time
the
out.
Matt Smith of it all, right?
We talked about a cuck. Let's talk about the opposite side
cock.
of that. Let's talk about it.
Sorry.
Oh, Mike, that's so good.
The
Now-
cuck and the cock. That's the king and his brother.
Cocky Matt Damon here. Matt
God
Damon,
damn
Matt
it.
Smith. I'm
Fortune
sorry.
favors the brave.
Did you guys Morbin time it? I never saw Morbin.
I've never morbed once.
Absolutely have not.
And you guys are not Doctor Who guys.
Nope.
Well, I was back in the day in the early 2000s, like the Christopher Eccleston era and the David Tennant era. I did
Right.
watch. That's like 15 years ago at this point, which is crazy to think about. There's been like 4 Doctors since then, but I kind of tuned out after the Tennant era, so
Mhm.
I never really got into the Matt Smith era. But I will tell you, now you might say, okay, Matt Smith, he's kind of a weird choice. When they
do.
announced the casting, I actually thought it was a good choice because I watched this show on Netflix called The Queen. right? Now, this is a
Oh,
show that
Gambit.
yeah.
No, I watched that with chess. I remember.
Queen's Gambit.
Yeah.
No, the Queen, which follows, which
Right,
it's a show I kind of hate watch because I kind of hate the British royal family. But
Oh, right. It's that one. Yes.
I watch it. It's a show that kind of it's a historical telling of Queen Elizabeth's reign from when she is enthroned, after World War II.
After the abdication and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So her uncle abdicated, then her father died of cancer, and then she became queen at like 30 or something.
Which
So
weirdly is similar political, and even though it's real life, like that
Oh,
succession
right.
laws, and like even the king
Exactly,
just
yeah.
being
I
like,
see
"Fuck
where you're
this,
going
who's going
here.
to take over?" But yeah, so Matt Smith in
Right.
that show. Who does
But-
he play again?
Yeah, so that show, it goes through the whole era. So there's 3 different casts playing the young characters, then the middle-aged characters, and the old characters. The young characters. So Matt Smith played Prince Philip, which was Queen Elizabeth's husband, a notorious asshole, like a really kind of a dickhead kind of guy. But what's great is he plays him as like a very unlikable kind of, like basically everything wrong with like the British aristocracy. He's very entitled and like racist and
Doesn't want to raise
that
his children and shit. He's like, "Yeah, fuck
Yeah,
that." Yeah.
yeah.
He's kind of an asshole.
But Matt Smith was so good at playing that role that I immediately was like, oh, who else to play a entitled royal kind of asshole, And that's kind of what his character has been set up so far in this first episode, right?
Yeah,
He
yeah,
also
absolutely.
looks like he, could be the product of, some inbreeding, perhaps.
Oh my
Perhaps
gosh,
a couple
yeah.
generations of it.
Oh,
I
sure.
just thought he looked so goofy with the wig, but I watched this episode twice actually, because I watched it once on a second screen and was like, I don't know how I really feel about it, and I don't know who the characters are. Like I still couldn't wrap my head around who is related to who, what is. So I had to watch
Right.
it a second time to really dial that in. And I think you're right. Like if he's supposed to be the entitled asshole, like I'm already hating him. So good on them. I think he's actually making it work. I do think the wig's a little goofy, but yeah, maybe that's inbreeding. I'll take it.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, yeah, I wish the wig blended a little better because it does look a little strange, but that's kind of the Targaryens look, as they all have like this platinum blonde hair.
Yeah, you got to do it.
Is he ripped in Morbius? He's very
I haven't
yoked
seen
out for
Morbius.
this role.
I think he
yeah,
probably
you
got
see
ripped for
him-
Morbius.
There,
Because he
you
gets
see him
powers in
shirtless in
it.
this first episode. It's a
Yeah.
very Henry Cavill like.
You see his
he's-
dick dog. I straight
Dang, I
up
wanted Henry Cavill's in this.
the
But yeah.
swing with the cloth where she says, "What troubles you, my lord?" I was like, "That's a dick, yo."
Yeah, we got one. They delivered on
Yeah.
what you want with Game of Thrones. The first thing you see is a dragon, and then you get some TNA and
jousting.
D. You know what? Real quick, let's hold it there because this is the House of the Dragon, which is shortened HOTD. So people have been just calling this now Hot D, and we got the Hot D in this. So
got
there you
Matt
go,
Smith's Hot D.
Hot D. So
Yeah, I
now
think,
every week I'm going to be watching Hot D.
I love Hot
There you
D.
go.
Yeah.
But I think Matt Smith, he got ripped for this role. It seems like,
Or Morbius.
He's playing the younger brother of the king, so he's kind of an asshole. He feels like he's entitled to be the heir.
He's like the captain of the guard, and he slaughters all the criminals and like cuts a dude's dick off or
Yeah,
balls
he's tough
off
on crime.
Yeah. So he's
Little
he's-
tough.
We see he's like a good fighter. He's a good jouster.
not the best though. He's capable,
gets
but a little.
beat.
He thinks more of himself than maybe he's actually
And a
capable
tantrum
of.
thrower.
Yeah.
But I think, Game of Thrones, obviously it's known for its kind of complex characters where everyone's kind of a shade of gray, right? So I think he's going to be sort of a villain, but not to the extent of like Joffrey or something like that, where he's just like completely. I think he's going to be more the Jaime Lannister of this show, where he's like very complex and you don't like him at first, but maybe you grow to like him or maybe not.
Oh yeah, Jamie
interesting.
starts off
Yeah.
really entitled and kind of like a dickhead, and then he kind of grows on you. Yeah, and that's kind of where
Right.
Damon's starting a little bit. I see that.
Totally.
Yeah. I dig it. I think it's going to be fine. But yeah, they definitely set him up. He wants to be on the throne, and then as we talk through the episode, we'll see does he get chosen or not. 'Cause
Yes, and we
we're
see
setting
all
up the
the-
conflict for the whole series basically in this episode.
Yes. So we see all the different people kind of whispering in the king's ear, like this person should be, it's the Game of Thrones. Everyone's trying to be on the throne, right? You win or you die.
And it asks you
Chaos
that
is a
question.
ladder, dude.
Chaos is a ladder. Would you put your sibling in charge over your spawn, essentially? And you're like, oh, I don't know.
Because essentially, so I guess what the big deal is, the wife is pregnant, the queen, and he's hoping that it's a boy. So they throw this big tournament, like, oh, she's going to go into labor during the tournament. I know it's going to be a son. It's going to be awesome. Everyone's going to
Very
go
masculine
wild,
energy.
right? Yeah, they're like, oh, I have my
Yeah.
son today, right? But there's a complication with the birth, to where he does end up having a son, but they're forced to do a cesarean, and then neither the wife nor the son survives. So the question is, who is your successor, your brother or your daughter? And that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and in the history of Westeros, there's never been a queen Targaryen that's
Just the
ruled over
queen
them
who
all.
never was, right?
Yes. So it's not, but it's not against like the rules, but
It's just
like
unprecedented.
unheard of in tradition. Yeah.
Hey,
So
if the maester tells me that like giving her more milk of the poppy might be dangerous, I'm still gonna be like, give her the fucking milk of the poppy, dog. Like I'm the fucking king. I understand.
Mm-hmm.
That's the morally gray situation that the king finds himself in, right? Is that he has to choose between saving his wife's life or possibly,
Getting a son.
choosing the baby. And he chooses the son, but then the son dies anyway. So it's just like, damn, you really screwed up, guy.
Yep.
And but it's
yeah,
kind
go
of
ahead.
commenting on, like you said, the patriarchy in
Mhm.
that, in that era. Obviously it's based on like medieval Renaissance, or not pre-Renaissance, I guess.
Yeah.
in, like, Europe, where this kind of thing would happen, right?
Yeah.
This daughter in these early scenes has set herself up as being a very pure Targaryen. She's a dragon rider, right?
Mhm.
She's got that capacity.
Cyrax.
She's interested in the ongoings of court, and she's just sort of regal mannered. She sits in on the council meetings, pours the drinks or whatever. Obviously a worthy heir, but like you guys are saying, misogyny is just so overwhelming. It's just absolutely not even an option.
Well, with Princess Rhaenyra, yeah, she's a pure blood Targaryen, which again that means that she's essentially 100% the product of Targaryen incest, meaning that because basically the Targaryens would just marry their sisters and cousins for generations.
Which the Lannisters were about that too. You know what I mean? That's royal.
Well, that's what
family.
Cersei and Jaime would argue. Is like, well, the Targaryens did it. We should be allowed to do it, but it's frowned upon unless it's the Targaryens.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, but that's very much.
I'm not arguing.
That's very akin to the Middle Ages succession. Like that's how they would do it.
The royal family was allowed to do it, but not you other noble houses.
No.
But as you can see, Princess Rhaenyra, there's a little bit of romance maybe between her and her uncle Daemon, or they may be foreshadowing something like that.
Oh, is that what's going on there?
Oh, you didn't pick that up?
I'm not picking up the romance on that.
He gives her the necklace and everything?
He's saying now we're both connected to our ancestors because I have Valyrian steel in my sword and now your necklace. I got you a gift because you're my favorite niece. That's how I read it, but I haven't read the book.
I don't know.
I don't want to spoil too much. I'm just saying what's sort of being foreshadowed.
It seems to me like Damon's more interested in his I don't want to be like demeaning, but the brothel lady. He has that girlfriend, his paramour. Like he's taken her with him.
He seems to confide in too. I wanted to ask about the necklace though, real quick, Jacob. Because we loved Valyrian Steel so much. Why is it not just called Targaryen Steel? What is Valyrian again?
Well, because it's from Valyria, which is where the Targaryens came from. It's in.
There was a scourge
Essos.
that happened. They had to bail.
The doom of Valyria.
That guy is, and then again, that guy is a conqueror. You're saying he's the Hannibal of this world. He just
Aegon
spread
the
out.
Conqueror,
And
So the Targaryens were a noble house in old Valyria. There was other noble houses
in
but
just
the
some made up
Targaryens
country
left before the doom, so everyone else died.
They saw a dream that said, "We need to get the fuck out of here."
It's basically
right?
it's like they saw Westeros was basically run by savages, which was the Northmen, basically
to
the
them.
first men. Yes, to them. What they
we have
savages.
nukes.
Yeah, like we have dragons. We can conquer anywhere we want.
They are British.
Exactly.
Colonialism.
Well, also they're kind of like the Romans.
Now
conquering,
kiss me, cousin.
Yeah,
the
totally.
British Isles, right back
Right.
Hadrian's Wall and all that.
Wow, yeah, that's true.
So, well, if you look at the continent of Westeros and just flip it, it's literally the British Isles. So,
oh, there you go.
Right.
It's very much based on that.
George R. R. Martin's a hack fraud. Noted. Okay. No, but yeah. So a lot of these themes are playing in, but yeah. So the Valyrian Steel, like they could only make it there, I guess, and so it's really hard to get
forged
now.
By Dragonfire. So in the Game of Thrones era, it's basically a metal that doesn't exist anymore because you can't make it without Dragonfire. But in this era, it's just very rare. We can still make more of it because obviously dragons are still a thing.
Will that necklace give her any sort of advantage like killing White Walkers does in the actual show?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Interesting.
But his whole
Okay.
sword, he's got, what's the sword's name? Like the Silent Sister or
Dark
The
something?
Bloodsucker.
Yeah.
The Dark
Dark
Sister.
Sister.
That's
Of course,
cool.
that's a big thing in Game of Thrones is naming your weapons, of course.
Yeah.
Ned Stark had the Valyrian Steel sword Ice, which was a great sword.
And then turned into two swords later for the
That's right.
Lannisters. Very wild. But regardless, so that's like him and his niece. They're going to be the two who's going to get power. And at a certain
Yes,
point,
well-
Viserys just says, "I'm going to name my daughter," which is unheard of. And I guess the night before, Daemon, after like the queen died and the baby, he's partying it up in the brothel.
Yeah.
And the king finds out and is like, "What the fuck,
He's
dude? You were
insulted.
celebrating your."
Fuck that kid.
And the king
Yeah.
was like, basically, so all the kings, his small council, they're all telling him, "Fuck Daemon, like he's too arrogant, and irrational."
He's a shit ass for the Reservoir Dog fans
Exactly,
or
he's a
Reservation Dog
shit-ass.
fans.
Then he releases a diss track entitled "Air for a Day."
Yeah. If you
Yeah.
could be an heir for one day, that song's going around TikTok right now.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because we see Princess Rhaenyra. Basically, we see her and Daemon's relationship, whatever it may be. She kind of has a change of opinion when she finds out what he said about her mom, which is the queen that died, right?
Mhm.
So definitely foreshadowing some things there. But basically, so the king is like, "What the fuck? I defended you. You're my brother. Like all my aides are telling me not to trust you, and I'm out here defending you, and you do that."
And
So
did
he
you
says-
literally say heir for a day? Did you say that like, you know?
Hey, did you
Yeah.
call me a cuck?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
So we see.
So he gets
basically
banished or
says-
sent somewhere else,
Yeah,
right?
he gets pegged. Well, so he's married to a lady of the Vale of House Aaron, which, if you remember from it's
Mhm.
another place in Game of Thrones. So he's supposed to be in the Vale, like being with his wife and stuff, but he doesn't really want to do that because obviously in Game of Thrones, marriages are made for political alignments and that kind of thing.
And he really looks
his-
down on the people of the Vale. He says, "Oh, they're a bunch of sheep fuckers, and the sheep look better than
Yeah.
the women." Like he makes it clear he has no interest in hanging out there, you know. But he
no.
says, "Go back to
Those
the
are the
Vale."
mountains, right?
Yeah, that's the one with the castle that like you drop people through the hole in the,
The
ground.
moon
It's-
door.
Oh, yeah,
the
I'll never
moon
forget
door.
it, dog. The greatest
Yeah.
name of all time.
The most defensible castle in all of Game of Thrones. It has a single road.
Exactly.
You could
That's
never
correct.
take the Vale, and that was its legend, right?
Yeah, and you could only get there by climbing up the mountain with
Mhm.
goats and stuff. But
Which looked better
Yeah,
than
so
the women,
Daemon-
according to Daemon. Yeah.
right.
That's great.
So he's here in King's Landing, the city, and so his brother's like, well, "Okay, go be commander of the city watch just so you have something to do." And so he takes the city watch and turns them into like a very strict law enforcement group that's cutting off, like you said, hands and dicks and things. So
He radicalizes them into the Proud Boys.
Oh, jeez.
basically, yeah, he's got his fascist military troops, which hopefully that won't come in handy later or something.
So here's what you're saying, and as we're getting through the plot, just to kind of give my feeling overall of the pilot
Yeah.
as well. You're talking about like, oh, here's this setup of like, this very obvious setup of this bad guy leading the military of this town. I wonder where that's gonna go. Oh, this woman keeps talking about this baby she's gonna have. What about this? And then I didn't pick up on the love stuff, but sure, you saying that, I can see that now.
well,
The
and
pilot,
Yeah,
well,
go ahead.
just the point I'm making of the
Mhm.
the pilot of Game of Thrones, every moment of that, from the opening beheading to a little boy being pushed out of the tower, I
Mhm.
felt like I had no idea what was going to happen.
Hmm.
Pilot of House of the Dragon felt very kind of beat for beat to me of, yes, I see what you're doing.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
get
it's
on board with
the
that.
pilot has a very hard job of like setting up all these characters, their relationships, what's going on in the world. Like it's kind of a hard job to set all that up in one episode. So I'm gonna give it some time.
Game
Like,
of Thrones does it well, though, dog.
Game of Thrones does it well. I don't know. I'm gonna give it some more time. I'm very optimistic after that first episode of where it's going, and I think I don't know. It's hard for me as someone who knows certain things about the plot, and this was true with Game of Thrones also. Like, it's hard for me to know the experience of someone seeing this plot for the first time, essentially. Whereas so it's hard to know for me what kind of a normie audience would think of something like this. You know what I mean?
So let us know on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube what you guys think.
Yeah.
But as kind of the normie, yeah, like I agree with Colin. I see like where it's going because he is captain of the watch, but then at the end they're like, "Fuck off out of here, brother Damon. Like you go where you're fucking supposed to be because you piss me off, right? Like whatever."
Yeah.
So then he takes his paramour from the brothel. They fly out on cataracts or whatever the fuck his dragon's called.
Right.
And so he's going to be like amassing forces and power, I guess, to make his play. Maybe it'll be with the daughter, like maybe with his niece if he's going to do incest weird shit or some other thing.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So I can see that there's some stuff at play, and there's a spoiler I'm not going to say that I got when I was looking up who are these characters, and I'm like, oh, that's so fucking obvious now that I know that. So it's a little bit of both where I have a little bit more information than I'm supposed to, and I'm like, okay, now I completely see where it's going.
Is it? Can I make a
Yeah.
guess? Can I hazard a guess? What it is?
Hazard a guess.
Is it that little girl's gonna start dating the dad? Right. That now that
Okay.
mom
Yes.
is
This is what
dead.
I wanted to talk about actually. So
That's
So
so
Light
family
spoilers
that we
for
did-
for expanded Game of Thrones
Well, it's
universe.
for-
If
That's
you
just
my
haven't
guess
seen,
from seeing the pilot.
It's
Yeah.
foreshadow, right? So there's
yeah,
let me talk about the high towers, right?
My
So you
lord, here's a
have
gift for you.
the Hand of the King is Sir Otto Hightower, played by
Sir
Rhys
Otto
Ifans,
Octavius.
or
Mhm.
however you say his name, Rhys Ifans.
Rhys fans, who
Sure.
you just
Mhm.
know from everything. I mean, truly, just a great Welsh character actor.
Yes.
the
Now
lizard.
his
Yeah,
daughter is Alicent Hightower, and that is the friend of Princess Rhaenyra. They're about the same age, and from what I know, those are the two characters after the time jump that will be played by different actresses. So they're going to
Correct.
age them up essentially. Right now they're like teenagers. In the time jump, they'll be like in their late 20s or something.
yeah.
Which means
Um,
Paddy Considine in the first shot of this is the same. It then jumps 10 years
Right.
forward, and then it's going to jump like
and
10
Matt
more
Smith
years. He's
too, I
like,
guess, but
still me. But
More
Matt
gray
Smith
hair.
wasn't in that first flashback.
oh right,
Yeah.
But and so obviously you're like, oh, this Hightower guy, he seems kind of okay. And then he's like, oh, my daughter, why don't you go comfort the king?
So
was that
spoilers
relating
for
to-
expanded universe, everybody?
Yeah.
Yes. I was looking up who is Hightower, who is she related to, why is she in the castle, like why is she friends with the princess? And it's like, oh,
she's a noble, yeah, she's of a noble house.
she's of, so it's like
The
if,
most homely woman in all of
it's
the
like
kingdom.
if
they
Arya
say.
was hanging out with one of the Baratheon kids, if they had him, like, oh, you're
Yeah.
the Hand's kid, right? So you can hang out in
Right.
the court. So then, yeah, I saw that it's like, oh, later the fucking next wife of King Viserys, and I'm like, well, shit,
But I
But
think
that's
that's
already
very
being
well.
He's
foreshadowed.
planting that by
Yes,
saying,
to
go
Jacob's
read him a book, comfort, it makes sense. He's making a
And this
play.
is
Because everyone's
commonplace
shitting on
in-
him all the time anyway.
He's playing with his little models first of all, which you guys
Yeah.
like to be.
I
king of
love
the kingdom
that.
And be like, well,
He's
of
making
course
the
you
He's
model
got his
for the
train
intro
set.
song.
He's got his
like,
toy train set.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
making the models for the intro song, right?
Yeah. Oh my God, incredible. But yeah, you see, because like the Hand of the King, having watched this twice now, like Damon's
Yeah.
always shitting on him. It's like, hey, your wife just died, didn't he? You bim, right? It's like, oh shit. Like
Right.
everyone's shitting on this guy, even though he's the Hand of the
Yeah.
King. So he's making his subtle play. I
Okay.
see now.
I'm
So there's
glad I could
So
feel
he's
that.
being
then.
more.
I see the three factions.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
he's being more subtle about it, more Littlefinger. But this was
Yes.
kind of commonplace where lords would set up their daughters with different and age difference. Obviously,
all
didn't
political.
factor into it at all in
Yep.
that time period.
No, not at
Um,
all.
where they're like, oh, you're gonna marry the king, so that our house will have more power and influence in this world.
Mhm.
What does the mom Targaryen say to what's her name, Rhaegarina? Is that who our lead girl is?
That's
Rhaenyra?
Rhaenyra.
But
New
when
Daenerys.
the mom says the women's battlefield is the bedroom.
Yeah, she says, yeah, this is where
Yes.
you're gonna have to chill. Yeah.
Because in this medieval society, the men's jobs was to go out and fight wars and do all that stuff. The women's job was essentially to produce heirs for the family line, to continue the family line.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what they put the emphasis on for women. Basically, you're there to just have kids, basically, and the queen is essentially saying, like, I'm sick of this. Like, I've had so many stillbirths and stuff because our medicine isn't, is shit, basically. Like they're like leeching us and stuff.
Give me more of that milk of the poppy.
Yeah.
So that was their essential job, basically.
No, yeah, and it's so obviously the drama comes with what portion of the old heads, let's say, are not going to honor the decision of Viserys, to choose his daughter to reign? Like, what percentage of people are just going to be like, no, fuck that, we're going to plot behind your back? Or is he going to change his mind and say, you know what, fuck that, I got a new wife and you're out, and then she's pissed? Or is Daemon just going to say, fuck all this? And, so this is where we're starting to put the players on the board.
Seeing the different factions coming together. And so with Alicent Hightower, so if we know that she's going to marry, King Viserys,
I'm sure that'll strain their
more
relationship.
Fertile woman, who's to say that he couldn't still have a male heir at this point?
And in the extended trailers, they do hint at like, oh, now they start beefing, and she will get in my way. Like, there's cryptic lines that we see in the later trailers that kind of hint at where we're going to go.
Are really good friends to start this, right? But maybe that
she just wants to get on a dragon and fly across the seas with her and adventure and hang out and have a girls' trip. Like, that's what she says in this.
Well,
I also thought
we
there
also
was some,
see her
like,
tutoring her, so we know she's smart.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
And there seemed to be some romantic stuff between them too, as well, where it's like,
could be.
Did you pick up on that either?
I don't know that I.
You're just seeing in Game of Thrones, I guess, romance can be literally anywhere.
It's on the table. As much as I'm seeing people where I'm like, which one of you is going to get your head chopped off?
Yeah, it's all on the table.
No, and the scenes that they're the early on scenes when they're hanging out, they just seem very close. I'll just say that.
Yeah, that's BFFs, but there's going to be tension added into kind of all these relationships and leverage, and is blood thicker than water? Like, all this stuff is going to be challenged here going forward, but. I think that's kind of the main plot of the first episode is, the king gets an heir, his wife dies, and then so does the heir, and then now...
Yeah, and we see the childbirth scene is kind of intercut with the jousting. Did you guys like that kind of thing? Very...
very on the nose.
Birth and death, the cycle of which... I like the jousting scenes. I think they were creatively shot. They felt pretty visceral, Like, I like when Matt Smith gets taken off his horse and he's sliding along the railing before he falls off. Yeah.
Like, since our beloved A Knight's Tale.
Not as good as A Knight's Tale. But...
Not as good, but since our beloved movie, I have not seen the little fist on the tip of the lance. I love seeing that thing. Oh, and Jacob, I wanted to point this out to you. The thing that I liked the most in this entire episode, because I love fantasy stuff, I love when it just, you whole hog embrace that shit. I swear to God, I had a Lego kit growing up that was his dragon armor he wears in that full.
Oh, no.
This is
badass.
For sure.
Yeah. And this is what I really like about this is that the costumes and the production value, it's like if Game of Thrones season 1 had that level, which it didn't because it was still more of an unheard of show. They didn't have the budget for it yet.
And there's a couple of sets you can reuse too. You know.
And they had jousting, if you remember, in the first season with the mountain, cuts his horse in half and everything. And that was done well at the time, but this is just much, better choreography, fight choreography, better costuming and stuff. But the way the suits of armor and stuff would be described in the books with the noble houses, where it'd be like a whole ass dragon helmet.
Yeah. The Hightower's helmet is a rampart castle, a tower. Yeah.
And and I don't think that Game of Thrones ever really captured the extravagance of certain things that are described in the books. They wanted to have like a more realistic kind of look, where I think this show is going a little more all out with the costumes. And I really like
Gilded
that
Age. Yeah.
Yes,
especially for like the highest upper class. Like the police have the gold cloaks. This is Rome at the peak of its decadence.
Yes, everything with the Targaryens is supposed to be so over the top, extravagant, and it's like the contrast between the extreme poverty of most people in the city versus the extravagance of the royal family, right?
And like even to look at Daemon picks his first opponent, and it's the Hightower's son, so it's the hand of the king's son. He's specifically like, fuck you, right? But even the Hightower's armor, while fancier than the average knight, is like leagues below Daemon's. Like even the next richest family is only so rich.
How the class system works in Game of Thrones is there's noble houses. Like anyone with a last name, you're probably from a noble house. And then the peasants, they're just called, whatever. You're born on Dirt Street. You're nothing to me. Targaryens.
Flea bottom. Yeah.
But the Targaryens, they say, they're closer to gods than other men. So they're the whole class above other royal house or
exactly
houses.
And to see that illustrated in the costuming is really nice. And then you have that lowly Dornish random knight who gets the better of Matt Smith's Daemon, and he yield. Sir, right?
Sir Kristen Cole.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I like that guy a lot. We'll see what happens with that. I didn't see
I
any
think there's
spoilers
a-
on him, but
Yeah, there's a lot of characters that we haven't even met yet. I think it's going to get expanded a lot. I think
oh,
the
can
big
I shout
difference
out
with... Yeah, go ahead.
Dougal Mackenzie from Outlander?
Oh yeah, that guy.
I love that guy.
Dougal
It's
Mackenzie.
I forgot his name.
He's
Oh,
the-
Graham
the-
McTavish.
Graham
Is he the
McTavish.
Sarah?
Yeah, the Kingsguard guy.
I'm a fan of
That
Graham
guy's a great
McTavish.
character
Yeah,
actor. Preacher. He plays the bad guy in Preacher.
yeah, he's kind of like the ward of Rhaenyra, right? Kind of makes sure she's all right, her bodyguard.
Yeah, well,
so to speak.
he's the Lord Commander of the Knight of the Kingsguard, which is the white cloaks. If you remember, that's what Jaime Lannister was in Game of
Okay,
Thrones.
yes.
So he's wearing his white armor at one point.
Yeah, but I'm
and
always
his
happy
job
to
is
see him
protect- Yeah,
protect the royal
protect
family
Princess
and everything.
Rhaenyra. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think
So-
the big difference with Game of Thrones is that this is a lot narrower in scope, whereas Game of Thrones, the King's Landing stuff is one part of it, but then you also had the North, you had Daenerys over in the East, you had all these different parts going on, where this is much more focused just on the Targaryen family stuff.
As
Does
they
that
say,
worry you, or is that the hope
Oh, good
that
question.
I
maybe
think-
if it's more defined?
I think it'll be interesting. I don't know if it'll be better or worse, but I think it has maybe an easier job of adapting this story because the scope of the Game of Thrones story is just so broad. So
this
you know,
is
like
very
George
much.
R. R. Martin is, yeah,
Well, the trailer, they say the only thing that could destroy the House of the Dragon is itself, right? So this is very much the internal conflict of kind of
God.
one core family instead of all the moving pieces that were in Game of Thrones. You know,
yeah.
we have
And like
Baratheon,
George R. R. Martin
Starks,
said
all that.
in interviews and stuff, like, oh, it should have gone, you know, several more seasons, Game of Thrones, just to wrap everything up, and they rushed it. That was the big problem. They rushed the ending, right? Benioff and Rice.
Rushed it.
This one,
They
we
didn't
don't
know
how
the
many
ending.
seasons it'll be. Yeah, that's the other problem.
Yeah, at
too,
least this
but
is done.
this one, yeah, this again, this is a lot like the prequels, the Star Wars prequels, I think, where it's this kind of it's a prequel.
Mhm.
And
Oh, whoa.
it's telling this whole conflict that we know how it ends, basically.
It
Um,
only has to own up to like 3 offhand comments. You know, it doesn't. There's not too much that it can mess up otherwise.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised that they mentioned the whole basically White Walkers coming and everything in this
Right.
because it really has nothing
I
to
had
do
a
with the show.
dream. yeah,
Yeah.
Jesus.
I guess they just throw that in for some fan service, I guess, but it's really kind of inconsequential to what's going on now. Since it's
I
not
thought
gonna
they were
happen
talking
for
about the
200
threat from the
years.
north just being the Starks and Bran the Broken. You know, they're going to take over.
Yeah.
Bran the Broken.
Well, so in the history of Westeros, basically, Aegon came over, said, "I have dragons, so
Hello.
you better kneel down to me." The
Get wrecked.
Starks in the north were like, "Fuck that, we're not going to be part of your kingdom." And for a long time, they couldn't conquer the north because it's more kind of
Icy.
a lot of land and stuff.
It's like a Song of Ice and
huge land.
Fire.
Yeah, but they resisted for a long time. Eventually, they knelt, and then Dorne never actually knelt to the Targaryens, which is the Sandy Kingdom in the south, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fuck you guys.
They never.
Where Bashir reigned.
Yes, Bashir was the king. or the
Alexander
prince,
Siddig.
and that's why he was allowed to be called prince instead of lord, because Dorne never officially kneeled. They only entered the kingdom through marriage eventually.
Mm.
That's why it's Prince Dorne Martell and Prince Oberyn Martell Pedro Pascal instead of lords, because they weren't allowed to be called kings, but they could be called princes instead of lords.
Oh, interesting. I
Fun
didn't
fact for you.
realize that. That is a fun fact. But yeah, this is narrower in scope, but that doesn't mean like, you know, we're not going to see other kingdoms or factions from the Vale or the adjacent areas aligning with, say, Daemon, or who does the Hand know? I mean, we've met Baratheons in the tournament. You know, we've met
Yes.
Dornish people in the tournament. So,
Baratheons, as we know, will eventually rebel against the Targaryens.
Eventually
and
take
overthrow them.
over.
Right.
right.
But
So
they're- Yeah, good.
it's just
the whole thing.
there's just a lot of, you can go into it just say, yeah, that we could see a lot more of that diversity we're used to. Like, we don't have to expect we're only going to be King's Landing focus for the whole show. I think it can get wider as we go forward, and I would hope to see
Yeah,
that.
and they even mention the free cities in Essos too a little bit, where they're talking about that in kind of like background dialogue. That's like Bravos, and you know where Arya goes in Game of Thrones for a while. And
Oh, the
it's a whole other
faceless.
continent.
Oh, I hope
Yeah.
we see some faceless people.
Hey,
Now, hold
this
on.
must
So
be rough
that's
for you
all-
knowing everything, but yeah, Colin, go ahead.
Well, we're talking story. So, you know, the big mythos of it all. Let's focus on the TV showness of it
Mhm.
and say this premiere episode did
Yes.
10 times the live viewing numbers of the Euphoria finale, which previously was one of the highest things HBO had. So this did 10 times that. This was
So it
a
had
Incredible.
10 million
huge
viewers.
success.
So that means Euphoria had 1 million, I guess.
I believe so.
Wow.
That's interesting. I have some numbers for you. So 10 million people tuned in yesterday to watch this show.
Live.
The season
Or to whatever effect.
yeah.
Yeah.
The season 1 pilot of Game of Thrones, I think, was like 2 million.
Okay. That's
That
still
was before it was heard
respectable.
of. And then the highest, I think, the first episode of season 8 of Game of Thrones, like 17 million.
Wow.
So because people were
Wow.
just so hyped about Game of Thrones. So the fact that it's still getting 10 million just on the promise of another Game of Thrones show, that's pretty good, I think.
Especially after getting
Yes.
burned quite literally. Ooh, yeah. By the finale.
Now, let's continue on that. So
Yes.
let's say coming off of the weakness of what the brand is going through,
Mm-hmm.
and we haven't mentioned this on the podcast, but Normie listeners, if you're savvy to what's going on at Warner Brothers,
Disney
Warner
Discovery.
Brothers Discovery now,
Mm-hmm.
that is important to take into this equation too, and for me to point out that it's estimated over $20 million per episode is the cost of this show. It's going to have
Yeah.
10.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
What do we, the numbers so far, that seems like a success to me. Obviously, they'll be chasing that 17. I could see them reaching that, but not until something like a finale. And then that's, I don't know.
If it gains the popularity of Game of Thrones had in its prime, which I don't know if it will, being sort of an offshoot. But keep in mind, just aside from that, they made another pilot with Naomi Watts in it, Blood Moon, that never aired for $30 million.
You remember my campaign, release the
Wow.
Blood Moon cut, of course. I'm pushing hard.
Yeah.
We got to get that pilot out, guys.
They made a $30 million pilot and then just scrapped it. So
Well,
they're not
now they've
afraid to
done a
spend
$90
money
million
on Game of
movie and
Thrones.
scrapped it. So
Yeah, but that
Well,
was even before all this nonsense. But the
Right.
thing is, Game of Thrones not going to be one of those shows that's cut because they obviously put a lot of money into these.
I would agree with that. And when David Zaslav, this new president or Warner Brothers, gives those shareholder meetings and he says the strengths of WB are, and he lists out like the DC comics. Oh, I had personal phone calls with J.K. Rowling. We're going to make so much more Wizarding World stuff. And of course, everybody loves the phenomenon known as Game of Thrones. You're going, well, he is highlighting that amongst those for a reason.
yeah, I mean, it's one of their flagship, franchises. I mean, they were pretty prevalent in the crowd of Space Jam too, which shows they were really
Right.
about it.
Mike,
Arya's in
outside of Lord of the
Multiverse.
Rings, but can you think of anything that's bigger fantasy-wise other than LOTR?
No.
Nothing.
Well, that's the thing is that when Game of Thrones ended, everyone's like, "Oh, what's the new Game of Thrones going to be? What's the new Game of Thrones?" Different places tried it. The
Called
Witcher,
Game of Thrones.
Witcher was all right, but didn't really live up to everything that the Game of Thrones can do. Wheel of Time.
Wheel
blah,
of
blah,
Time
blah.
on Amazon. Yeah, no way.
There's a
Rings of
couple
Power,
Netflix
maybe.
knockoff ones too.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
but it turns out the new Game of Thrones was just another Game of Thrones.
It
So
was the Game of Thrones we met along the way. You're
Well,
right.
then we have now the other RR author. The Lord of the Rings show is coming soon
Right.
too. So it's like, how is
Yeah.
that? Because
So
he
that'll
specifically
be-
said, "I want Game of Thrones on
That's the
Amazon
battle.
Prime."
Yeah.
I feel like this is going to be the
battle of the
Marvel
four
versus
Rs.
DC of the fantasy world now, where it's going to be
Right.
like, what's better, Game of Thrones, Rings of Power? They're directly competing now.
But-
Amazon
but-
versus HBO. Discovery.
can I
It's
say-
the WWF versus WCW. The Monday Night Wars are back,
Yeah.
baby.
Raw versus SmackDown.
The power
Raw versus
of
Nitro.
the Game of Thrones of it all is their iconography. Lord of the Rings is very like
High
universal
fantasy too.
Game of Thrones is very specific iconography, where it's like your Valyrian blade, we're gonna treat it like you getting a fucking lightsaber, or
Right.
these characteristics that this house has. It's not just like elves with pointy ears. It's like no, like this means something because of this. I think it's so, it's very edible. It's something that just like the common person can eat up. I think that's the
Yeah.
strength of Game of Thrones.
It feels less
Well, for-
nerdy because it's more
Yes.
grounded. Yeah.
Yes.
For me, it's always, and of course, I love Lord of the Rings movies. Peter Jackson and all that. For me, Lord of the Rings has always felt like very much like a mythology. Like this is something that like it's an ancient telling of a story or something, but it doesn't feel like real life. Game of Thrones to me feels like real people in a medieval fantasy setting, but they're
even
like,
with
real
dragons
people living real lives.
It's
even
treated
with the dragons,
more realistically.
The dragons are just like essentially a different kind of animal, so it's not like they're doing they're not talking or like doing magic spells or anything.
We literally have immortal beings in Lord of the Rings, so.
But I believe, Jacob, didn't you famously say on our Lord of the Rings episode that the difference between these two properties is that they can say fuck, and you would never have an elf say fuck in the universe of Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
And also people can fuck.
Yes. Lord of the Rings was written in a time where fuck wasn't really used in daily conversation, I feel like.
George R.
They're not going to say arse or anything. That's what grounded fantasy is versus high fantasy. Right?
Well, they're not going to describe sex scenes or like a failed.
Tolkien's not fascinated in that. That's not. Even if fuck was a thing, he wouldn't use it in his books because that's not the kind of thing he's writing. But
it's pure world.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also Game of Thrones kind of got a bad reputation of like, oh, they just throw in so many sex scenes and stuff, which I think the show was guilty of at times, where it's like, oh, what is this sex scene? Like, what does this really need to be in here other than for just to put it in there? Like
that was sensualization,
I feel like,
or whatever you call it.
In the books, every sex scene or description of anything sexually related is always to drive either the plot or to inform you about a character in some way.
Someone's gaining information through pillow talk or something about the way they're interacting is setting you their mental state.
Instead of just... like he wasn't just throwing in random sex scenes.
George R. Martin is a master of the boudoir experience, okay? I like that
I think
Game of...
this...
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it has dirt on. It has dirt. I can't stop stepping on your lines, bro. I'm sorry.
Duel each other.
You're going.
It's okay. I was just gonna say, like, I think this show is gonna be kind of more sensitive to that aspect of like not just being needlessly exploitative. I guess.
It did seem dialed back here.
A lot less rape.
Yeah. And even the sex scenes, it's a little more tame. But I like Game of Thrones. Yeah, it has dirt under its fingernails, kind of fantasy.
Yeah.
I also look at it as, I was thinking today, why does it have such a mass appeal? Because Lord of the Rings is still kind of nerdy, but Game of Thrones can be cool. And then it hit me that it's just kind of like this low fantasy soap opera that's got something for everybody. It's got the action and like cool badass dude stuff, but then it also has like this romance and intrigue, but then it also has the mean girls or mean boys. Like,
and a lot of it is just like talking. Like even in Game of Thrones, like there wasn't a lot of action until like the last couple episodes of the season, usually, right? With like kind of the climax of the season. It was a lot more walk and talk type stuff.
I would argue, soap opera.
The draw is the swords and the blowjobs, guys. Like truly, it's that perfect
for some people,
mixture. I think for 75% of people.
But if I could just throw out something with George R. R. Martin versus J.R.R. Tolkien, he's actually said something in an interview that I was reading today that was interesting, where George R. R. Martin was like, I really like Tolkien, but I have like a quibble with him where he basically Tolkien would just write like, oh, Aragorn, and then Aragorn became king, reigned for 100 years, and everything was good. George R. R. Martin would be like, well, what's his like tax policy? What's his, what's he going to have the city watch do? Like he wants to get into specifics
like as a king?
How did he have 100 years of good rule? What were his policies?
Right.
Yeah. He made his brother head of the city watch, obviously.
Right.
He was a racist.
He made Faramir start cutting people's hands off for robbing. Yeah, I want to see that show. I think that's a debate we're going to be having if we start looking into Rings of Power, is like which of these fantasy worlds, is better, so to speak. Like that's going to happen among nerds, I think, the comparison, because they are directly competing now.
But that's kind of what I'm expecting with Rings of Power, is it's going to be more of like a mythology where there's like, beings that live hundreds of years are doing things. It's much more of a grand thing rather than the daily lives of like people just toiling away in the city, which is kind of how I think of Game of Thrones.
Right. Not to be too much on Rings of Power before we get out of here and give our final thoughts and talk about other prequels. like the thought of like if you have elves that live hundreds of years, right? And then you also have them working alongside kingdoms of men. To do that with like a Game of Thrones thing, you would have to have the same elf characters alongside 3 generations of human characters.
Sure.
Like the 100 years of Targaryen reign, you would need to have
that
the
wouldn't
same.
work.
Right, it's a little
Well, everyone
different.
lives, even like Aragorn is like 80
As a
years old when
Numenor
he first
descendant,
meet
he
him.
can
Yeah.
live
Right.
200 years. But yeah,
Everyone
it's
lives super
And then he
long
goes
in
into
Lord
the
of the Rings.
stars.
but yeah,
Mike, Ring of Power is your show. This is Jacob's show. Mine
Yeah.
is that Chris
We're
Pine
drawing
Dungeons
our
and Dragons
battle lines.
movie.
okay, there we go.
I'm right in the middle of you guys.
I'm
We need
looking
the
for-
Dungeons
I'm
and
looking
Dragons
forward to
show,
that.
honestly. It would be best served as a
Dog.
show.
It
A
would be
weekly
better
adventures.
served.
Come on. All right. Well, I
We'll
say
see.
let's get out of here and get our final thoughts maybe on the first episode of Hot D.
House of the Dragon. Hot D.
Hot D.
right after this.
I have so much more I could say, but I won't.
Well, it's like, yeah,
Well,
if
you
you know
should.
what the plot is. Because
That's
like
the thing
I
is,
just
like,
looking
yeah.
at a family tree, I'm sure I could figure out, okay, here's who wins. So that's kind of a weakness of the show,
That's
right?
true too.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you can see who the next king is in the history of Game of Thrones.
And
or
just
king or
put it
queen.
together, right? So,
Yeah.
we're back, but that's kind of the danger with this
Oh.
show being a prequel, right? I figured that's a good place to come in because if you start
Yeah.
looking stuff up, you might open yourself up to spoiling the entire plot of this. So
Even when I said that thing, about Daemon and Rhaenyra, maybe there being something romantic, I thought that was kind of obvious in what I was picking up in the show, but
Mhm.
like I'm using what I know about it to inform what I'm watching.
well, that's
so I
part
gotta
of
be
why I
careful.
was looking stuff up because I'm like, wait, are they brother and sister, or is that his? Like, I didn't understand the familial relationship
Right,
to
couldn't
anybody
tell
at all. So now, like, okay, I kind of get what you're saying. So, yeah, it's an interesting situation to be in. But yeah, we're final thoughts on the House of the Dragon.
On House of Pancakes.
Yes. Hot
I
pea.
had.
Enter the dragon.
Interno-
Enter the dragon with the
International-
House of Pancakes.
Yes,
That's what
yes.
this is called.
Enter the dragon with a plate of pancakes. I love it.
Bruce
That's
Lee in this show, Mike, would be amazing.
Right. He would be the more like the Viper archetype. I could see him in some armor. You're going crazy. But final thoughts on this. First episode. We might not be doing. We're not gonna do every episode weekly, but maybe we'll touch in on a whatcha and maybe a finale thing. We'll see where we're at. But I think
Yeah.
at least I'm excited to continue watching it. We have 10 weeks of this, so 10 million's no joke for that first thing. I remember I saw a TikTok where this like entire apartment building, all of their TVs were flashing in sync because
Right.
like 80% of
Saw
the
that,
building
very
was
funny.
watching
Okay,
it.
that first of all, that's amazing. But also,
Incredible.
that must mean that they all had cable, because if it was
Yeah,
on
you're
streaming,
sitting
how would
down.
you wouldn't all start streaming at the same
But you
time? So
texted
it
me at
must have
6
been-
and said it was live, and they could have all just been like, go,
They could
right?
all just
And
started
crash
at the
the
same
app.
time.
But it
Yeah.
could imply cable. I'm with you there.
Here was my experience. Jacob texted us early on Sunday because this will give my final thoughts on House of Pancakes.
Yeah. Not as good as Denny's.
Not as good as Denny's. Jacob texted us in our little group chat and was like, yo, it's live. I was like, oh, shit. And Jacob said he was going to watch the rehearsal finale first,
Mhm.
but
Yes.
getting that early on a Sunday where I was like, I feel good. My chores are done. Fucking sun's still up. Jacob just said this show thing that I have to watch for this podcast is live. I know it's going to take an hour. I've still got time to get that done, play some video games, maybe watch a movie, fucking wrap up this Sunday night. I was in such a good mood putting it on.
Oh, there you go.
And honestly, when it ended,
Oh,
I couldn't
no.
remember anything that happened. I was like,
No.
oh no. So my question to you, Mike, is with this second viewing, like, is that the key? And when you're doing that, like, are you grabbing onto a character where you're like, well, this is the storyline I'm excited to follow? Because I just had none of that watching this the first time.
Yeah. So again, after the first watching, it was a lot like you, where I'm like, it's
What
dressed up.
happened? Like literally, I was like, I didn't look at my phone. Like,
No.
I watched it. It ended, and I was like,
Okay.
what happened in it? No, keep
This
going,
is-
Mike. Keep going, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was hard for me to keep track because again, the names are similar, and it's you're
names are
introduced.
similar.
It's like when you go to a party and you meet 20 people.
Yeah.
I don't fucking ever remember anybody's
Shaking
names.
a lot of hands.
Yeah. So I'm already kind of bad at that. So it was a lot to take in. The second viewing after doing like research, it did hit more. Now I'm keying on the players that maybe I didn't even realize were players.
But someone you're excited for, like literally a storyline from that pilot where you're like, well, okay, at least I know I've got that character.
Yeah, I want to know what that Dornish dude does because he beat fucking Damon. I
Sir
do.
Kristen
He's a common born,
do
and he beat
not.
Damon. No, he is. I like that
That's
guy.
not your person.
Maybe
to
he's just
watch, is
handsome.
it? That's great.
Well,
Yeah.
this is interesting to me because
Yeah,
again,
please.
my perspective is skewed by someone who knows a lot of the details already.
Madman's knowledge. Yeah.
But I've had this phenomenon before with like Witcher season 1. The second time I watched that whole season, it made so much more sense to me because I could be like, oh,
I
who's
remember
this
you
person?
saying that.
What time period is this? At least this all takes place in mostly one time period, I guess, with the exception of the first scene. But I think
And a time jump, but yeah.
I thought this actually did a pretty good job of like explaining who everyone is in a way that made sense. But again, maybe that's just because I know things already. But I thought they did a good job of like throwing in dialogue of like, oh, that's you're my daughter, or you're my uncle, or whatever.
But you get like one line of that, and then it's like,
Yeah.
You definitely
you
had
could
to
miss
pay
it.
attention.
But
Yeah.
I wasn't so worried about the lay of the land because, again, I kind of feel like everything they were setting down, I was like, yeah, this is the vibe you're putting off. I completely I'm with you. But
I agree.
It's just the excitement.
I agree, Colin. There's not characters to latch onto like a Jon Snow or an Arya. Like, there's not characters like that yet where you're immediately like, whoa, this is an interesting character. I want to
Or
see
like
what
Jaime and
happens.
Cersei and immediately pushing a kid out a window. Like, I'm intrigued, like Colin said. So
Jaime
not-
That
comes
was a
out
great
hot.
way to start.
And I remember
yeah.
him.
Even if you hate him, you're like, but with Daemon, you're kind of like, no, I get it. Like,
Yeah.
nah, I
Yeah.
know what you're doing. I get it.
So
Yep.
right now you essentially have Daemon. You have
Yeah.
Rhaenyra. You're like, oh, this could be interesting. She's kind of like the new Daenerys, I guess. I agree. It's going to take a little more. And again, I think it's the narrower scope of just focusing on the Targaryens rather than the shifting point of views of Game of Thrones, where it's jumping all around different locations and different storylines.
I will say, Jacob, narratively, super bold and risky for you to do your entire pilot with what I assume are the lead character that's not going to be that actress for the rest of the series. Like, that's also like very confusing.
Yeah, that's interesting to me, and I guess I can tell you when the time jump happens. Is that too much of a spoiler to say?
Is it going to be late in the season? If it's not by the next episode, there's not a lot for me to invest in someone who I'm like, you're not even going to be this character the whole time.
Well,
bro.
That's what's interesting, and I'm very excited to see how this plays out, I guess, because I did like this actress Millie Alcock who's playing Rhaenyra, and I was like, this is interesting. So the time jump happens exactly halfway through the season. 5 episodes.
That's
we get
wild.
5 episodes with her, 5 episodes with the older actress, and Alison Hightower as well. So I'm not sure how that'll work, but I'm interested to find out, I guess.
That other chick's a big actress, the one who's going to play the Hightower girl. What's her name? Olivia Cooke or whatever?
Cooke. Yeah.
She did the Ready Player One movie.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's just wild to be like, I'm not in the whole Game of Thrones thing. No.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say what, but I also looked up Damon's paramour, and like that character is played by the woman from Ex Machina, who plays the Japanese robot lady who stabs. So that's her, but like I learned about that character, and I'm like, well, I know spoilers for that, but you know, I just wanted to shout out an Ex Machina actor whenever I can.
She's great.
Yeah,
she's kind of the Shay, whereas you remember Tyrion had his paramour Shay, but they couldn't get married because it would be against the kind of mores of society to marry a lady of the night or whatever.
Yeah, so Damon had also expressed, like, I don't care about my wife back in the Vale. So he'd rather spend time with this lady. So he's bringing her back to the Vale. It's like, if I got a dip, you're coming with me. But I guess
can't wait to see the wife.
Yeah, but that's going to be interesting, especially if she's, like, striking and Damon's just, like, a shithead about it. But I'm intrigued to see where it's going. I don't think it was as strong of a first episode. And I guess I'm intrigued by half before and half after. And that's it. Yeah.
Mike, what if the wife is played by Lamb Chop? What if it is an actual sheep?
Oh, if it's actually a sheep, bro, that's
like,
the
I
most
told
Game
you,
of Thrones
they're
thing you could do. No one believes them. Yeah.
I think so.
Moon
Season 1 of Game of Thrones, I remember it took a few episodes for me to get into it, and I wasn't fully into it until episode 5, which was the jousting episode in Game of Thrones, right, with the mountain and everything.
And I was able to binge that. So yeah, this is my first time watching weekly, like from a fresh kind of experience. Yeah.
Yeah, you binged all of Game of Thrones. You gotta
rewatch the pilot, guys. It's so good. It's crazy good.
But again, it has so much more to draw from being adapted. Like the first season is very close to a Game of Thrones, the novel, the first book in the series. And it has a very striking opening book. There it is, opening chapter, even with Ned Stark cutting off that guy's head right at the beginning and all that stuff. I think this is going to be a little slower to get into, but I think it's going to be rewarding if you do get into it, I hope. So, and I guess my biggest weakness, like you said, some of these characters, they're kind of stock, or like where they're going. Like, and I'm interested to see if they twist that in some way, so it's not just very stock fantasy type characters.
Like even with the Littlefinger and who was the Varys, like just them talking, it could be like, I have no idea what you guys are actually going to do. Like they're both being so deceitful and double talking, and like this, it's like, I know that you're going to make this play.
It's definitely not on that
I can
level
read
yet,
the
but I
defense
think,
easier in this show, let's say.
Yeah, but I think the pilot has a hard job of setting everything up, and hopefully they're able to kind of make things more subtle or more complex as the season goes on.
I give them an A for effort,
Yeah.
People forget this weird period of must-see TV where it was like, we watch Walking Dead live every week because any of my favorite characters could die. And you were like, oh. And then I remember my dad reading a entertainment magazine, when I was home from college or whatever, and he was like, look at this article. It's for the show called Game of Thrones. It's kind of like Walking Dead, where like anybody can die. Doesn't even matter how big the actor is. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And Jacob, you saying these networks chasing that, that really kind of was the legacy, or like the effect was this weird soap opera-esque shows where like any character you loved could go, and then you would just jump on the internet or Tumblr, Twitter, or whatever, and react. That was the big thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to recapture that now.
Well, I think the plot of A Song of Ice and Fire was just so well suited to be adapted into a show like this. You had the big events. You had Ned Stark dying at the end of book 1, which was a perfect climax to season 1. You have the Red Wedding. You have these huge events where it's like, oh, that's going to be must see TV. I don't know if this show will have anything on that level of like, oh shit,
Right.
And we've also just become more used to this kind of story, so it's like, oh, we can kind of see things coming better now.
Imitators included, right? All the shows that tried to do it worsely, like we kind of remember that in our subconscious. So hopefully they can capture lightning in a bottle, because I want good Game of Thrones content. I want Hot D to be hot, dude.
I think
it's almost would almost, just to kind of recapture this lightning that I'm saying of these deaths every week, you would almost need the effect of that show, The Last Man on Earth. That Will Forte show, where a random celebrity just joins every episode. You almost need a show that like pulls that move off now, right?
Right.
And Lord of the Rings can't kill anybody because, like, oh, well, Galadriel exists in the Peter Jackson movies. She's not going to die. Elrond's not going to die. Sauron's not going to, like, die, whatever.
Right.
So we'll see.
Well, this you can read this book, The World of Ice and Fire. You can see, oh, that person's not going to die. That person's not going to die.
You know what I'm going to do, Jacob? I'm going to adapt that cooking book he made. I'm going to sell that to HBO. I'm going to bring George R. R. Martin on. He'll be as involved as the fans want him to be. George, how does this fucking pie look, you big fat fucking...
This character's a tomato. Will he survive this recipe? Nope.
And if you read the books, that's another thing that he loves to do, is describe the food at feasts and stuff.
The food at the party was so good. 10 pages on it. I wonder why.
That's what I love. That's what people love in the
I've been I've been way into cooking, so I'm here for it.
Dog.
But the other thing about just to wrap up the whole next Game of Thrones thing, the other funny thing about that was, I think the closest thing to the politics of Game of Thrones was actually Succession.
I was just saying, don't say Succession, but you're right.
You have made that claim
on HBO.
Before, yes.
So they had the next Game of Thrones right there.
And that's kind of one of those must-see where anything can happen, right?
Not to the point of like characters like murdering each other
beheaded
with swords, but it's essentially
who knows?
The backstabbing in a modern
just as much incest,
sort of.
I hope, right?
Yeah.
Westworld really tried, right?
Westworld went off the rails so
It
soon,
just,
though.
it just,
it had
that was
one
the
good
issue.
season.
One and a half good seasons, but yeah. So we'll see. I want to note that Rings of Power, directly made to compete with this type of stuff, September 2nd, which is a Friday. So they don't have the guts to go toe-to-toe on Sunday, but we'll be having from September 2nd on at least 8
Two
weeks
new
of
fantasy
Friday and
Wow,
Sunday
we're
big
close.
Every
fantasy.
weekend.
And
That's crazy.
here's the thing I
2 weeks
do
from
actually
now.
want to wrap up with.
2 weeks
I
from
appreciate
Friday.
you saying that, Mike. Because even for me saying all this is my little Sunday show now. I don't have anything else to watch.
Well, it's
on
cool.
Sunday.
You can watch it at 6 p.m. and then play
I'm
more video
excited
games.
To watch the fucking Mike. I'll probably next time play the video game while I watch it because maybe now I'm not as invested, unfortunately. But
Yeah,
so what?
and when
I'll
Last
still
of
kinda
Us comes
watch
out
it.
next year, that'll be a Sunday show, hopefully.
Hell yeah.
It's crazy to think Walking Dead, we watched that for so long, but a lot of those seasons we were just like, man, this is so bad now. Why are we still watching it?
Last Comic-Con story I will ever tell. I swear to God on this podcast. The elevators were all Walking Dead themed, and each one had 2 or 3 characters on them for the last season. You know, that was advertised.
That you didn't recognize?
Well, just buddy, there were 9 elevators total. All of them were different ones. So think about that. That many characters. They would open up and then you'd see like a zombie thing. But otherwise, when they were closed, you'd see those characters. My brother and I, we recognized 2 people, dog. I was like,
Daryl and
oh,
Carol.
that's
Michonne.
Daryl and Carol. And then I was
Daryl
like,
and
yeah,
Carol.
I don't know who the rest
Nice.
of
The
these
only
are.
2 remaining actors from the first season.
Can you
Daryl and
imagine?
Carol.
We
Yeah.
should do an episode where we watch like the finale and just try to
No
like
context.
describe.
I have seen it more recently than you guys because I
You
watched,
watched
like,
to the
season 9
Rick
and 10.
disappearing, yeah. But
I
that was
watched
even.
after the Rick disappearing. Yeah,
But was that even like a season ago? Are you like one full
that's
one
like
behind
2
still?
seasons ago. But it's still following some of the same character. Like Rick's daughter is like a big character now. Which
I
is the
watched 3
baby.
Well-
episodes on an airplane of season 9 or something, and that was
Yeah.
it. Recently.
That was the Rick season.
Yeah, when Rick was about to leave. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyways,
We need to get
Can you
Daryl
imagine?
podcast.
on the
Yeah.
Game of
Can you
Thrones show.
imagine?
Put him in some armor. Let him do anything else. Just give him a crossbow.
I
Give him
wish.
a medieval motorcycle.
There were all
Yes, a
those rumors
horse.
forever that
And a crossbow.
Westworld would have a
Yeah.
Westeros world. Do you guys remember that?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They
Well,
should
that
have done
would be
like
their
Samurai
night world.
World, like
Westeros
wasn't
World.
that the original like spin-off or
Well, that's
whatever?
in season 2 or 3.
Oh,
They
right.
go
I
to
think I
see
stopped
Samurai World.
watching.
That's in one of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, because they have Hiroyuki Sanada, I think, in there.
I
Yeah.
stopped watching before that.
Who should
Aaron
be in
Paul's
Westeros?
on that show, I guess.
No. All right, let's drop it.
Let's
HBO
drop it.
shows, we don't watch you. Let's drop.
Sorry, Aaron
Let's
Paul.
drop House of the Dragons. Thank you guys all for listening. We appreciate it, of course. As we said halfway through this podcast, if you are reading these books, if you have these thoughts and opinions on this pilot, let us know. Hit us up at normies_like_us on all social media. And of course, check out our YouTube page as well.
Yes, and as I mentioned at the top, we're going to mention a prequel that I think works because unlike Benioff and Weiss, I deliver on my promises. An episode that's doing very well, thanks to you guys, Prey. I think Prey is a great prequel that
Wow.
expands on the universe of the original in a
There you
nothing
go.
but positive way. So there you go. And thanks
Yes.
for checking that out and checking this out, Normies.
Well, Colin, let me ask you this really quick. We mentioned Better Call Saul. Some people saying it surpassed Breaking Bad. You watched all of Better Call Saul, right?
I watched
Yes
the
or no?
finale. I
Do you think it's better?
bawled
than
my
Breaking
eyes
Bad?
out. I watched Breaking Bad in quarantine, so I had a fresh viewing and
recent,
did
yeah.
El Camino.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
then because I was so
Did everything?
where am
Breaking
I
Bad.
on Better Call Saul? I rewatched all of Better Call Saul too. So
Nice.
I like
Wow.
fully had the run through.
That's what I need to do because I'm like a couple seasons behind on Better Call Saul and never got back into it. So I need to like rewatch it all.
I thought I could do the thing of, oh, Netflix has the third one. I think the fourth is airing or the fifth is. I'll jump in here. It's impossible, Jacob. You have to start over.
Well, I've seen everything with his his brother,
Yeah.
blah blah blah. But
Go
I
back.
maybe start
redo it.
after that. Yeah.
Is it
I
better?
say better than I say better.
I've heard that a lot, so maybe I'll have to do the rewatches too.
Wow.
There, you heard
Bob
it
Odenkirk.
first here, Normies. Some of the
love
best
him.
I love
prequel
him.
content.
Hey,
All right.
I'm in Westeros. It's me, Bob. Oh, wow, Bob Odenkirk. You're
Look,
the
I don't want
Lord
to
of
sit on the
Money
Iron
or
Throne.
whatever.
It's too much trouble.
It'd be like a medieval lawyer.
Yeah.
Could be this show's Littlefinger or something.
Yeah.
Just arranging marriages and shit for political power. All
I'd
right.
watch it. Thank you, Normies. We have been your hosts. This is Colin Crabmasher.
Of the House of the Dragon.
What was the story even? I can't even. Who told the Crabmasher?
Because of his interesting ways of dealing with prisoners. The crab feeder.
Okay.
Feeds them
The
to
crab.
crabs.
Creative ways, I
Okay,
guess.
sure.
But yeah, there once was a house in Westeros ruled by Targaryens. It's been the ruin of many another clan. But God, I know I'm not one because I'm Mike Serious of the House of the Dragon.
We had a dirty lyric at the end there.
Was that a limerick?
Yeah.
This is Jakari's Cobb Carrion.
All right. Dracarys.
Jakari's Fire and Blood. Signing off.
Signing off. That was a House of the Rising Sun reference.
Oh.
There was a house in Westeros.
Oh, man, yeah,
ruled by
boy,
the
that
Targaryens.
Please put that in.
It's
What a reveal.
a ruin. Yeah.